the state.
Hi, I'm Helena Varenko, and this is Code the State. This podcast is about how governments change in the digital age and about people building that change. Today, we're talking about one of the biggest paradoxes in digital government: why governments invest billions and billions into digital platforms that citizens still don't use, don't understand, or simply don't trust. My guests today are Alana Maria Ali, digital government and trade facilitator and advisor, who builds national scale digital platforms and makes sure they deliver real outcomes long after the launch day. Hi, Alana. Good to see you.
Hi, Helen.
Second guest is Nicole Greene, a GovTech communication strategist and DPI advisor who helps governments turn complex digital policy into something citizens actually understand. Nicole, welcome to the Code.
Good morning, everybody.
So let's start with a quick round, short answers only. To the both of you, what frustrates citizens more, bad technology or bad bureaucracy? Nicole.
I think if you have bad bureaucracy digitized, when you take a broken process and you just take that online, then you haven't changed anything, you haven't transformed anything, you've taken frustration and made it portable.
Got it. Alana?
I would have to agree with what Nicole said. Ultimately, you can fix bad technology, but a broken process just gets faster, ultimately.
Second question, what government digital service faces the biggest challenge in getting people to use it? Nicole.
I think any solution where people would rather pay somebody to stand in line for them because the risk of making a mistake on a system that they don't fully understand, or because the perceived penalty of the digital error feels higher than the cost of the standing physically in line. Whenever there's that disconnect in trust, that's going to be a challenge to implement and have adopted.
Alana?
I would say if I had to identify a particular type of platform that a government would implement that can create a challenge in the adoption by its citizenry, I would say platforms that are designed for social benefit and like a social service platform, because by and large, the investment required to serve the people, most probably at the lowest strata of society, the thought process in inherently the design and how that type of user will interact with it, those platforms, the benefits on social services platforms, tend to be one of those system interactions with citizens that can be challenging to adopt.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So that's why, not the complexity, but just because of the type of people that this platform is about to serve.
Yes. For example, if you are designing a system for the business registry, you're catering to a particular demographic that has digital literacy experience at a much granular level than persons that exist at the lower strata of society. So, that will be like a more niche system. But a social services platform where grants are, you apply for a grant and to receive money from government, etc. Those tend to be very overlooked in terms of the quality of design and how the users will interact, thereby retarding the adoption of the system.
Interesting thought I just had. So, combining both of your answers, now I really want to know what kind of service often makes people say, I would just rather come, and see the agent or a civil servant face to face rather than doing something online. And that would be actually one of the examples why it's, keeping us backwards rather than going forward. And I would like to ask probably first you, Nicole, what do you think is or who do you think is the biggest contributor to the lack of the trust or creating this gap?
Well, first, if I could just address something that you pointed out there, you're absolutely right. People compare the they're not comparing a digital service to a government digital service to another government digital service. They're comparing this experience on this new government digital service to their last successful transaction on a digital service. And that is not, it is likely not going to be a government service. It is going to be something from the private sector. And so you may have persons who are very much digitally literate, who are extremely comfortable navigating this world. And when they use a solution from the government that doesn't match their expectations, there is that sense of disappointment. But the state has a responsibility to make sure that everyone feels comfortable. And so sometimes there is a bit of a challenge there in ensuring that you're designing for inclusion. And so just to keep in mind that if that is your challenge, as it is for us in Trinidad and Tobago, one of the things that you really need to make sure that you have is that touch point to bridge that digital divide and ensure that everyone isn't forced to use this new solution and people can have that learning curve and they can have some hand holding. In our case, we have TT Connect that does an amazing job walking people through every government service and providing them with that comfort level so that they can go off and do it on their own the next time. Really, really important to make that distinction there in terms of the audiences and their experiences and their expectations versus the responsibility of the state. It's not a minor thing. The state has a lot on its plate when it comes to designing and developing these solutions. And so in terms of winning public trust and getting that adoption in place, I would say you need to start communicating early. So the issue isn't always, aside from the design, and this is, you realize that all of this, we haven't touched on development. All of this is about communication and design. So communication at different touch points, whether it is on whatever channel as well as within the interaction itself. So the challenge is, for me, not messaging, but early, transparent communication, sensitization of your audience, no matter where they sit, whether they're digitally literate, whether they're not, whatever their concerns are, whether they're private sector, business, whether they are students, whether they are parents, whatever your segment is, making sure that you're connecting with those various audience segments and getting the feedback in early to ensure that you are designing for their needs. So you're incorporating that into your design and your development, and producing, as Alana said, something that the citizen needs, something that is solving the challenge from their perspective. And that's how you build the trust. So we see that pattern around the world where you're focusing on your communication to try to get people to use your system at the time of launch, but you've missed months of groundwork and inclusion of stakeholder needs and considerations. So that's the big focus, I would say, for me. Yes, communication all through, involving stakeholders, and at launch and post-launch is really important to make sure that people will use your system. But from a communications point of view, you need to be starting from moment one, day one.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I think it's actually a perfect transition to what I was going to ask Alana about this point. So basically, from your experience, if you can share where you built one of those platforms, what principles matter the most for people to want to actually use it, from day one and not fight with that? How did you achieve that? What was your playbook?
Thank you, Helen. Great question, follow-up question. And I just want to piggyback off of something Nicole said just now, where, you know, the citizens, most times when they interact on a face-to-face level, they're able to have that one-on-one communication with the level 1 officer. But when you're using an application, we don't know if it's working. And most times, platforms do not communicate clearly if their upload was received. And then what are the next steps? So you're just kind of going blindly through an application process online, and there is no I don't want to say forerunner, but there is no information readily available to let a first-time user to, as to Nicole's point, sometimes these end users are quite prolific navigating digital platforms, be it Amazon or their online banking. But because they are not familiar with what the steps are to an application being approved, it's kind of like navigating through the dark. And sometimes all you get is a confirmation number, which is a combination of alphanumerical values. And the citizen or the applicant may not be thoroughly satisfied, because at the end of it, silence is what drives them back through the door. They know they can speak to someone, they can ask the real-time questions. So after this part of the process, what is my next step? And then the line officer will communicate, well, within 14 to 20 business days, your application will be approved. So there are 3 critical aspects of my playbook that I often go to as the foundation before we even start engaging government stakeholders or private sector stakeholders. And I really come back to these 3 parts because they are all congruent. And the first one is designed for the hardest user, not the average one, but designed for the hardest user, because your hardest user generally will be someone with low connectivity, someone who has low digital literacy, because scrolling through TikTok and Instagram Reels does not equate to digital literacy. Let's be real. And, low trust in government, and especially in low-income development countries such as Trinidad and Tobago, there's a high low trust in government, and especially when there comes to having to put your data on a system, there's a natural correlation that goes on. Well, if manually things don't work, what makes me think that a digital platform is going to work? So the first one is designed for the hardest user, because if you design for the easy user, you exclude the majority. Yeah. The second one is reliability before features. I have sat in many rooms where, everyone has great ideas, everyone has something to bring to the table. And a lot of times it's all the funky features where you can just, maybe take a snap of a handwritten document and it gets transposed digitally. Citizens will forgive a simple system, but citizens will not forgive if their data is lost, or in the middle of an application it gets timed out and then they have to start the process all over again. So every feature added before the core is stable is a liability, and it's not an improvement. So instead of all the bells and the whistles that we want to implement from the get-go, I always recommend that, okay, let's look at the actual objective of why we are designing and building the system. And it is from there, then you can build out what funky new features that you can add on. And the last one, which is actually what Nicole actually ended her input with, was, and this happens very often in major national large-scale projects, where a communication plan or an execution plan specifically for what happens after post-launch is one of the major areas that is often overlooked. And what I mean by that is, when you launch a system, Who answers when something goes wrong 9 a.m.? Who is the person that communicates when a citizen is trying to send an application, encounters an error? What is the feedback loop within the stakeholders who are the custodians of the system? And that feedback loop goes from your frontline officers back to the product team. What is that communication internally, not just with the citizens, but how does the congruence of information work to be a solid backstop? Because the platform is not the product. The sustained function and service, that is the product.
Thank you so much, Alana. So, if I were to summarize both of your points, basically what I hear is, okay, we have a platform, but what to do best to solve, well, let's say in easy way, the big problem, if I may say, is to communicate as early as possible, and that's where you start always. But then, for example, I understand that even if we build by your playbook, by the way, thank you so much for sharing the steps. We understand that even like technically solid platforms that have still easy user experience, it might still be confusing and frustrating and disconnected because we're talking about like nations of people, right? So there are very different requirements to something that people would consider easy, something that also maybe goes due to the language differences. Maybe we have multiple languages in one state, and I'm trying to dig up a little bit more what maybe we can do from communication side to eliminate all of those ambiguities, to like not to do so much different mistakes when launching a new digital service. Nicole, I think it's more a question to you because we are well. You've probably seen it all, and I'm very keen to understand what do you have in your book.
The communication mistakes. I think the most common mistake is not engaging not understanding your audience and your audience segments well enough from the start. And what I mean by that is not just the usual, you may have 2 or 3 typical personas who are going to use your system, and you design around them, and you think that, okay, that's a great design approach. Wonderful. That's a wonderful thing to do. But have you also considered the persons on the ground where you need to build trust, the stakeholders that you need to ensure that your solution is adopted, supported at a leadership level? So not just all of the related ministries that are directly affected by the solution, but do all of the ministries understand the role of this component and how it fits into the wider digital strategy? And so therefore what the needs may be for them, or what the benefits may be for them, if not now, then down the road. Who is going to support your solution and understand it well enough to champion legislative changes through Parliament? Who are the persons on the ground who are going to be your voice in rooms where you can't be? The state can't be in every space. They're not going to be having the conversation in the barbershop where somebody has doubts. You need to be empowering persons to be able to carry your message and hold a debate when you are not even in the room. So I think underestimating who you're speaking to and not designing communication strategies for each of those target audiences is something we see fairly often. But I also think misinterpreting silence for success is another critical stumbling block. So when you launch a digital digital platform and nobody's complaining. And so therefore you say, oh, well, we've done a great job. We haven't been getting complaints. But that can be a red flag, because every community that wasn't reached, every question that wasn't answered, and every avenue that hasn't been communicated for that feedback loop, as Alana pointed out, creates an information vacuum. And where you have a vacuum, someone is going to fill it. And it is either going to be you, or it is going to be filled with misinformation. So you also want to resist the urge to reassure harder if you see that your adoption is you're not getting the uptake that you're expecting. Or when trust is breaking down, we've seen it, with contact tracing apps during the COVID times, digital ID rollouts, health platforms across the globe. When something goes wrong, the reflex is to buy more ads, get more voices out, more promotional messaging. But you cannot broadcast your way out of a trust deficit. The correct response would be to step back from the megaphone and to use those trusted voices within the community, independent technologists, community leaders, professionals who have tested the system. Allow them to speak on your behalf in front of the public, and allow them to criticize. Not every observation or criticism is intended to break you down. It's an opportunity to improve and align to stakeholder needs. So that counterintuitive pivot is something that most communication teams on the ground who are implementing a solution, they very often have not been trained to execute. So those are, I think, the three critical areas.
Code estate.
That is such a golden information. Thank you, Nicole. I see that this is kind of a role of ambassador to the service, to not the state, but still a user, somebody in between who can actually transmit the global idea to actual users, because they're also part of this community, just more tech savvy. Alana, I see you smiling a lot, and I'm very keen to ask you, basically what just Nicole said. By the end of the podcast, we can have a playbook for launching digital service, communication and implementation guide rules. I'm very keen to ask you about the tips and tricks on implementation or maybe design decisions that can change how citizens experience a governmental platform when it's being launched. What can be done better?
I think I'm going to answer it with an example, an implementation example. And that implementation would be a platform called Irembo in Rwanda. And I keep returning to the Rwanda Irembo story because what they got right wasn't just the technology platform that is named Irembo. It's not the technology stack that they got right. What they got right was understanding the behavior of their citizenry. Because one of the things that is quite unique about Rwanda is that prior to Irembo, Rwandans transacted through mobile money, and access to government was through the mobile phone. I'm talking about the old-time TDMA phone, where you had to put star and type in numbers to actually get services from the telecoms. So they were able to uniquely develop Irembo around the way that their citizens behave. So they designed Irembo to work through the mobile phone without having to type out things. They can just send a digital code, asterisk 652, and that was equated to a digital government service. And that, Helen, is the true distinction. Designing around behavior means you watch how people interact with existing broken processes. And before you build anything and you you design around that reality and not the ideal perfect world that you wish the citizenry to interact and operate. It's truly about being in touch with the way that your citizens behave. And to that point, I would say I do have one more example, one that is more of a regional example. There is a platform called DigiGov, which the government of St. Lucia implemented. And I have to say, I had the honor and privilege of being part of the design and implementation team and subsequent adoption framework that was designed. I remember very early on when the design of the platform was on a whiteboard and we were trying to flesh out what would be the foundational services, etc., etc. And we were just walking through with the client what a user experience would be like. And I remember stopping the technical team that I was working with and saying to them, Caribbean people have that shopping cart mentality. They want to be able to apply for many things and use their credit card once for a transaction, ultimately too, because the fees are pretty exorbitant and on this side of the world for those types of transactions. And my design team was, no, that's not how it's done. It's one checkout per application. Suffice to say, 3 months post-launch, a change request was made for the shopping cart concept where someone can apply for multiple birth certificates and pay for one. For example, a family having to renew their passport and get updated birth certificates, instead of applying for all 5 persons in the household individually, they can now just apply for all 5 birth certificates and make one checkout. So it's really about understanding the behavior of your citizenry.
Wow, honestly, yes, it's such a cool concept. A family is treated as a entity, and you don't have to worry about, where is my third child's birth certificate? Okay, Nicole, I'm very keen to hear from you now. What is the kind of service that also could make you say, okay, they handled it really well, maybe from your experience in Trinidad and Tobago, but not limited to.
Okay, I will give an example in Trinidad and Tobago, not because the solution is perfect, but because the focus was in the right place. So as Alana said, people will forgive a technology solution that isn't perfect, that might be a little bit clunky, but that meets their needs and delivers an ease, right? It gives them, or at least it gets them closer to where they want to go. Let's talk about Trinidad and Tobago's online driving permit renewal system. So that is a system that was introduced to, at launch, allow persons who drive a particular class or 2 classes of vehicles and who did not require additional services such as a name change or such as supporting medicals, etc. So sort of the vanilla case of somebody renewing their driver's permit for these 2 classes of vehicles, right? And previously, you would have to go into the very crowded licensing office. You'd have to sit there with a lot of persons. You'd have to get there. Let's say they open at 8, you'd have to get there at maybe like 6, collect some forms. There'd be people outside with forms. So there's a whole industry that sprung up with persons who would get paid to give you forms, help take photographs, wherever, whatever, help you with lots of things. Supporting this process, right? And then you'd have to wait for a very long time. And this is a process that could take a day. Now, a day for just to renew your driver's permit, if you are somebody who depends on your license for work. You're a taxi driver. You work in transport, and you're a courier, or just you're a very busy professional and you don't have a day to lose for this very critical thing. If you bring that person to the point where you are reducing the number of persons who are required to be in licensing office on any given day, you're taking the load off of both the state, the person sitting behind the desk, as well as the persons seated within the office, and reducing the wait times there. You're also providing the opportunity for convenience. So while I can still choose to go into, I'm digitally literate, but I can choose to go into the licensing office because I want to get this thing in a half an hour now, in the half an hour to an hour that it takes now versus the day that it used to take. You provided them a benefit, right? If I don't fall within those classes, class 1 and class 3 of the driver's permits, I'm still facing reduced times within the physical office. If I am not digitally literate and I prefer to go in and deal with somebody myself, if I have a medical certificate, whatever it is, and I need to see an officer, my wait times are reduced. So the process is not perfect. It didn't start in a perfect state, but the state rolled it out with this pilot case and then is expanding. So now I think there are more cases, more classes that have been added on, and eventually they will continue to grow. And even when you look at the design of the solution itself, it's mapped against existing processes within the transport division. So you have, or licensing. So you have concerns of the state. You have concerns related to the processes that have been developed over years to deal with human behavior characteristics that we've seen, to deal with interactions behind the scenes with related to information exchange, etc., that the public will not be aware of, but is very much a concern of the state agency who is delivering the solution. And so they are benefiting as well as the citizens benefiting. There's a lot going on in terms of moving digital transformation forward. It's not just a pretty looking solution for a citizen to use. So the approach to understanding the needs for each audience segment and bringing them a solution that takes them closer to efficiency, closer to meeting their needs, and then allowing them space to grow and refine processes within the agency, I think is a really solid approach. I think it was very well received. It was launched into public distrust. People didn't trust the competence. They didn't trust that the solution would actually work. They put forward cases that, the system will go down. It will be unreliable. It will not deliver on time as it says. It will be inaccessible sometimes. And that didn't happen. That wasn't the experience. And so therefore you started seeing trust being built, and you started seeing citizens beginning to advocate and spread the word organically that, you don't have to go in. Are you between these ages and do you drive this class of vehicle? Then you can use this online driver's permit renewal system. So they become your informal ambassadors of your solution, which I think should be the goal always. And just the fact that the state agency itself has continued on the roadmap. They haven't just dropped it, but they've now taken it further along, and they're including additional classes, etc. It will continue to grow and improve. And so I think there's something to be taken away from that. You don't necessarily have to launch with perfect, but you do have to launch with building trust in mind and catering to the needs of all your audience segments.
Thanks, Nicole. I actually think that's going to be my takeaway. It's not like we forget, but it's always good to remind ourselves why we're doing what we're doing. And for me today, that would be that the government benefits when the citizen benefits, not the other way around. I mean, well, you know what I'm talking about. What would be your takeaway, Alana, in one sentence?
My takeaway would be governments need to embody a version of Maslow's management theory. Happy workers are good workers. Well, happy citizens are good citizens. I think anything further I add will only take away from the essence of what Nicole has just said. So truly, if governments look inwardly and understand fundamentally, we need to respect our citizens' time. We need to be able to show up responsibly and efficiently to our citizenry. So I would say good citizens are happy citizens.
Unbelievable. Thank you. Nicole, one sentence from you.
Yeah, I agree. I think yes, happy citizen is a well said, Alana. I would like to say that strategic communication. We often, how many times have you heard this? The last mile of digital transformation. I think strategic communication. Do not think about strategic communication as the last mile of digital transformation. It is the foundation and it deserves the same rigor as the code. Without your strategic communications in place and being considered at the depth and breadth that it needs to be from day one, moment one, you're going to keep having these conversations about, will people really adopt our solution? Is it going to be a success?
Thanks. I actually agree. Strategic communication is avant-garde, not the arrière-garde. Thank you. This is Code the State, produced with the support of the International Telecommunication Union. If this conversation sparked something, follow the podcast and share it with someone working on digital government. See you next time.